Hello and welcome to this presentation on modernity and modernism. Today we're going to talk about things that happened at the start of the 1900s on up to today that really changed the way we think about literature and art generally. So we're going to talk about modernism, which is a style of art, and modernity, which is just the condition of living in the modern world. And a famous modernist writer from the early 20th century, the early 1900s, was a woman named Virginia Woolf. And she is known for a lot of great novels, but also this particular quote in which she said, on or about December 1910, human character changed. I'm not saying that one went out as one might into a garden and there saw that a rose had flowered, or that a hen had laid an egg. The change was not sudden and definite like that. Now she's being a little bit provocative by saying, it all changed in December 1910. But you have to take her point that around that time, people started thinking differently about things for a lot of reasons, and we're going to go through some of those reasons today. Notice this, in 1917, a man named Marcel Duchamp created a work of art which is in this case, in this museum that you can see in the photograph. It is a urinal. So you get the feeling that the idea of what is art has changed a lot. And I love the picture of the woman, looking very closely at this lovely piece of sculpture, the shape, and you sort of wonder, what is she appreciating about the urinal? Well, Duchamp is asking us the question, what do we even mean by art? So you get the idea. Things have changed. Notice he didn't even sign it with his own name. He made up a name, R. Mutt, 1917, and put it in a gallery and basically said, what do you think? Is that art? There it is from a different angle. You can see what it looks like there. And you do start to notice, wow, it definitely looks like something. Somebody designed it. Somebody created it. It's on its side. It doesn't seem to be functioning. I don't know. And then you start to ask yourself, why am I even looking at this? Okay. It gets a bit weirder because that piece of art is very, very famous. And this is a picture of an art museum where many, many years ago, when I was your age, I worked as a security guard. That's the Indiana University Art Museum, and I worked right inside those doors. And the picture on the right shows you that we had a Marcel Duchamp collection, including the urinal. And my job was to protect the urinal and stand there and ask people, please don't touch that. It's a work of art, okay? Do you notice anything strange about that photo? Do you notice that that urinal doesn't seem to match exactly the picture that you saw a moment ago? Because there were copies made of the urinal. Duchamp approved these copies, and you start to really wonder, what am I even looking at? It's a copy of a urinal that he just picked and signed and dated, and now it's art? Well, I had a lot of time to think about it as I stood in that museum protecting it. I learned a lot about art there because up on the top floor was also our African art collection, and you realize looking at those pieces of art that art is not a given. It's not just natural, the way we write novels or the way we paint paintings or the way we create sculptures. Every culture does it differently, and every time period does it differently. So you look at some of the things coming from the African collection and you realize, wow, they have a very different way of thinking about human representation. There's a mask, there's another mask. Okay. Now, let's rush forward a bit here into the later part of the, towards the end of the 20th century, the end of the 1900s, and we get this famous piece of art, which won the Turner Prize. That's a prize, comes out every year. You've probably read about it in the newspaper. It goes to someone who's done something creative and innovative in the world of art. And one year, Tracy Emin, the artist, won it for this installation called My Bed. And it was literally her bed with all the mess and the ashtrays and the rubbish. And she just stuck it in a museum and said, that's art. Okay. Again, that may strike us as weird. And every year when the Turner Prize is announced, people start writing letters saying, this is outrageous. This is not art. But the whole point is it's asking us, what do we mean by art? Well, Emin herself really wanted that piece to go to a museum and thought it should go to the Tate Modern Museum in London. But the Tate Modern Gallery couldn't afford to bid on it when it went up for auction, because eventually it sold for £2.5 million. What you're looking at right there, £2.5 million. Makes you think, doesn't it? What do we mean by art? I'm just going to show you another silly example. This was nominated for the Turner Prize. Makes you ask, what do we mean by art? And that's actually a huge sculpture. There's a picture of a gallery goer looking at the piece of art. Okay, let's go back to the early 20th century now and ask ourselves, what changed when Wolfe said 1910 things changed, or around then? Well, let's go back all the way about 1902, and you realize in the late 1800s, just at the turn of the century, things like film, all kinds of technology was starting to be invented, and we had film. You know, photography was quite highly developed. That changed the way we think about painting. But you can look at this film on YouTube, The Man on the Moon or Voyage dans la Lune. It's animated. That's actually a real human face in the middle of the moon there. That's all kind of plastered around him. And then they animated the rocket landing on the moon. It's an amazing little film, and it makes you wonder what's possible in visual representation now. It's very hard to paint an old-fashioned painting once you've been exposed to all this new technology. And there we now we're more comfortable. No more urinals and whatever. There's a nice painting by John Constable, 1831. We're going way back to the early part of the 1800s, and we realize, that's what we're used to. But now that we've seen the African art and we've seen the modern works, we start to look at this and think, you know what? He was just doing what his culture told him to do. This isn't just a natural, normal painting. This is a painting from the 1830s. And what do we learn about the 1830s? What do we learn is really important to society in the 1830s? Well, what's at the center of that painting? Salisbury Cathedral. And look at the shape of it, pointing straight up, just as the architect intended, pointing to God, pointing to heaven. That's what we aspire to in that period of time. That's the center thing. And what's all around it? Nature. Look at the cows grazing and drinking water, and people walking down the nicely tended path. Nature, animals, humanity, God, religion, all in perfect harmony. This is a painting that would have made people very, very content and very happy then. The problem came at the turn of the century, around 1910, and certainly as we head into the First World War, people didn't feel at peace and at harmony with the world as much as they may have back then. Here's a painting as we move into the later 1800s, and it's called Pastoral. It's also a rural scene, but you notice the figures here are dressed and pretending to be like ancient Greek shepherds. He's playing on a flute. It's not realistic. It's not contemporary. It's a mix of the natural world and the mythological world. And you realize, people are starting to experiment with what can go into a painting in that way. And then this is possibly the most interesting example. Look at the date on this, 1844. We're nowhere near 1910 yet. You know, these changes were a long time coming. 1844, you'd think it would be another cathedral, you know, because that's so long ago. But no, J.M.W. Turner made this painting called Rain, Steam, and Speed. And what is it? I'm sure you can tell me. That is a train. It's a locomotive. And off to the left, you can see a bridge. And you don't know, is it cloud? Is it, the rain is kind of blurring the way we see things. And the speed is blurring the way we see things. Okay? And Turner doesn't want to do like a Constable painting and make it look sort of realistic in that way. He says, The speed of trains is making us view things differently. Who would have ever thought we could move so quickly? And in fact, when the rail lines were first built, rumors went around because people were scared of going that fast. Up to then, they'd only been in horses and carriages. And a rumor had gone around saying, hey, listen, if anybody goes over 30 miles an hour, we think people will die. You know, like your heart can't take it. So this was a brand new, it's like space age travel for us, you know. So his painting is starting to reveal modern things are happening long before 1910. But you see the direction we're moving in. The times are changing, the technology is changing, the art is changing, and the literature is going to change. Someone you might be more familiar with, Van Gogh, and you know his sunflower painting. Here's his painting of a church. Look how different that is from Constable. The lines aren't straight, it's wobbly. And you can imagine people back then saying, well, obviously he didn't know how to paint. The colors are a bit weird, you know. But this is expressionism. He's trying to capture a feeling in the moment. And that church does not embody the same confidence, the same solidity, the same permanence that the Constable painting does. It's more reflective of the doubts and worries and concerns of the 1890s. And of course, one of the things that happened around 1910, this is actually 1913, was this famous art exhibit. The International Exhibition of Modern Art, which was called the Armory Show because it was held in an armory building in New York City. And you look at the list of artists there. We've got Delacroix, Degas, Cézanne, Renoir, Monet, Seurat, Van Gogh, all these guys who are huge names now. Their stuff sells for millions and millions and millions. But then this was the new art. This looked different. And that exhibition really shook up the art world. It made novelists rethink what they were doing. It made poets rethink what they were doing. It was a big event, the Armory Show. These are some of the paintings that were there. And our friend Duchamp, who did the urinal, that's his painting up in the upper left-hand corner. I don't suppose you know what's in that. I look at that painting and I can see exactly what it is, but every year I show students this and they seem a bit mystified by it. That painting is called Nude Descending a Staircase, and it looks like stop-action photographs of every step that someone took coming down the stairs. You can see the leg, the hip, the shoulder, the head. Now it's all a bit cubist or abstract, like a Picasso painting, but it shows motion, and you realize they're thinking about cinema, they're thinking about film. It jokingly was called, by other people who couldn't really see what was happening in it, it acquired the nickname Explosion in a Chicken Factory. So you can think of it whatever you wish, but you can see that the very modern types of art that were in the Armory Show. Okay, let's talk about technology and what was changing at this time. By 1890, they started to use clocks to stamp workers' cards as they were coming into work. You've probably had this experienced, although now I imagine you maybe put a thumbprint on a reader or something like that, or you brush your card over a reader. But it started then that you had to be to work by a certain minute of the day. And you realize in earlier times when people were working in farms and in fields rather than factories, they came in the morning, right? At dawn. They were more in touch with the rhythms of the natural world. But now we answer to the clock. And again, around the same time in 1913, 10 years after he founded the Ford Motor Company, and remember that name, Ford Motor Company, you still see him on the road every day, because when we read Huxley's novel, Ford is going to play a very big role in that. But Ford was the guy who really mastered the art of the assembly line. Rather than 10 guys all standing around one car and building it piece by piece, the cars moved through the assembly line, and each person had one small job. I'll put on the windscreen wiper, I'll put on the tire, and I just put on tires all day. You become highly, highly specialized, and you may not even see the completed car as it goes out the other end of the factory. So there are real issues with this. People have to do very repetitive work. They raise questions of, have we just become part of the machinery? Are we still invested in our work? Are we like craftsmen? Do we care what the car looks like at the end? This kind of mechanization makes it difficult to care. Another big event, 1913, the first time a signal was transmitted from the Eiffel Tower all around the globe. Now, that's just a photograph of the Eiffel Tower being hit by lightning. That's not the actual radio signal being delivered there. But they did send out a radio signal because radios had been, the radio had been invented by then. And what that meant was if they relayed a radio signal all the way around the globe, we could all agree what time it is. And that helps the clock determine what time we need to get to work. So at 10 a.m., boom, 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 everybody synchronized their clocks. Okay? I mean, the joke used to be in the 1800s, I think it was Cork, somebody said that the tower that had 4 faces of the clock, that all 4 faces in that town, in that city, had different times on them. I don't know if that's true or not, but you get the idea that we couldn't really agree on precise time, but radio made that possible. And even the Eiffel Tower, that is a very modern construct. Okay? And then the biggest change, 1914, is the start of the First World War and the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, not to be confused with the band called Franz Ferdinand. But that changes the world entirely because all that mechanization, all that technology, all that modernity now goes to war and is used to kill people, and Europe is virtually destroyed by it. And we have photography and we have film, so people can now see what's happening at the front. It used to be they just read the poems and looked at the paintings, but now they can see how mechanized, how dirty, how inhumane it all looked. And people are starting to lose their belief in the cause of war, and they think critically about their nation. And it's absolutely devastating to people's belief system from 1914 to 1918. Here's an example of the kind of painting they might have looked at in the years before. This is actually a German postcard from 1914, but in a much earlier style, showing a cavalry charge. And it says, the text says how heroic these people are. But the fact is, there was no cavalry charge at that time. They're using the conventions of an older kind of art to keep people's spirits up and keep them optimistic, because they've now started to see too many photographs, and that changes the way people think. Here's another one. This is just a crazy painting. It's a wildly exaggerated depiction of a minor incident. This couldn't have happened. You wouldn't have had horses and cavalry and rifle companies lined up 5 feet from each other in this way. It's going to take time for the reality of this new industrial warfare to be accepted by the artists, but it has begun, and the modernist artists are pushing this forward so that art doesn't live in the past like this anymore. If you want to read a great book about the effect of the First World War on all aspects of modern culture, there's a book in the library called The Great War and Modern Memory by Paul Fussell. And he makes the point that all those words like patriotism and honor and glory and all the things we would talk about that soldiers get up to began to sound quite hollow once the First World War got underway. It was hard to have faith in that same way of thinking because Europe just looks destroyed by the whole experience. And years later, Charlie Chaplin made a film called simply Modern Times, and this is a famous image of it where he looks as if he's just been caught up in the machinery of the factory where he works. And that's proven to be a terrific metaphor for the changes modernity brought, that people were feeling disconnected from nature and almost as if they're becoming part of the machinery.